What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back with another Pokemon card auctions of the week recap. Folks, we saw some incredible highs and also some discouraging lows this week with certain cards, both vintage and modern. I got a great recap for you, folks, so please stay tuned to the very end. A quick shout out to today's awesome video sponsor. It's the great people over at CantoShark.com, the ultimate Pokemon card marketplace. If you are in the market for anything from high-end vintage slabs to high-end modern slabs to very competitively priced modern cards, CantoShark's got you covered. Not only that, but I think they have the most comprehensive and insane selection of sealed product available for you, and you can guarantee that this is authentic sealed product, which is, of course, very important. But if you're not in the market for buying right now, consider selling on their very established marketplace, as they are one of the most trustworthy sellers in this hobby with a very competitive consignment fee rate. A link to their website will be in the description of this video, folks. Go check them out, and thank you so much for your support. Let's get into today's recap, starting off with a couple of Zards from the newest set, Phantasmal Flames. Here we have the Mega Charizard EX Special Illustration Rare. We saw several PSA 10s come by. Started out around $3,905. Here's another sale for $3,950. Ended up selling later on in the week for about $3,350. And then we saw the Gold Hyper Rare Mega Charizard EX come by. We saw two sales as a PSA 10, one for $4,950, the other one for $4,050. A couple of Rainbow Rares came by. Folks, are you a fan of Rainbow Rares? If I'm honest with myself, neither am I, but these are pretty noteworthy Pokemon. Here is a Pikachu and Zekrom GX from Team Up. We all love Team Up though, right? This card sold as a PSA 10 for $436. Here is the Gengar Mimikyu GX, also from Team Up, sold for $855. And then we saw an Umbreon GX, which is from the Sun and Moon base set, I believe, sold for $760. And now on to some cards that have not been doing as well as they were earlier this year, or even earlier this month, really. Here is the Full Art Jesse and James card from Hidden Fates that was selling earlier this year, back in January, February, for as high as $300 in auction. But recently, this card has come down quite a bit, almost being cut in half, selling this week in auction for $163.61. Here we have the Persian Illustration Rare from Shrouded Fable. Folks, at one point, this card was doing exceptionally well, selling for like $430 in auction. I remember it. I remember covering this card. But in the most recent sales, a week or two ago, it sold for $270, and this past week it sold for $190. We also saw from Shrouded Fable the Illustration Rare Houndoom that used to sell, like I said, earlier this year for about $310, but recently has come down to about $200, all the way down to $177 in auction. And folks, this card has had a very recent decline in value. Just earlier this month, in November, this Blaziken VMAX Alt Art from Chilling Reign was selling for over $1,000. Here's a sale for $1,026. Here's a sale for $1,045. Here's a sale for $1,050. But just this past week, it has come down hundreds of dollars in value, selling for $621 to $597. And then lastly, this card isn't quite as dramatic. Maybe it is, I don't know. It's the Shining Lugia, folks, that was selling earlier this year for over $1,400. Here's a sale for $1,425. But this past week, it has come down to about $868, which is still a very impressive price, a very awesome card, but we should definitely keep our eyes on this card. Maybe a buying opportunity. I don't know. What do you think? On to this massive lot of 74 PSA graded cards. Folks, there were PSA 10s, 9s, 8s, and 7s, modern and vintage, sold for $5,969. And what's weird to me, folks, is the fact that, first off, I calculated the value for each of these cards because I was looking to pick this lot up, and I calculated the value at about $6,000, and then it ends up in auction for, $6,000. I remember a time, folks, where you can get a lot like this and get a banger of a deal, but it seems like lots like this anymore just go for the value. Sucks. Continuing on with some modern insane sales, here is the Mimikyu Scream promo. Sold as a PSA 10 this week for $11,080. Here is the Gold Medal Charizard card from the Celebrations UPC, sold for $10,600. This is actually a very difficult card to grade because I'll tell you what, you get them right out of the UPCs, they're all chipped and scratched and yeah. And then a couple of noteworthy cards from the black and white era. Here is a Legendary Treasures Mew EX full art card, sold as a PSA 10 for $7,370, while this full art Deoxys EX from Plasma Freeze sold as a PSA 10 for $8,100. On to some vintage cards. We have this first edition Holo Raichu from Fossil that sold as a PSA 10 for $4,266. Here we have an Unlimited Dark Dragonite Holo from Team Rocket, sold for $2,518, while the first edition copy of this card sold for $7,700. From the Neo series, we saw this first edition Ho-Oh in PSA 10 sell for $5,556. Here's a first edition Shining Kabutops that sold for $2,550. An Unlimited Shining Charizard in PSA 10 that sold for $9,300. And a first edition Shining Mewtwo that sold for a whopping $11,111. A couple of cards from the E-Series. Here is the Holo Typhlosion from Expedition, sold for $3,850. Here is the Holo Flareon from Skyridge. Flareon's been doing very well recently. Yeah, if you remember the sale of the Jungle Flareon from a week or so ago, this one here sold for $4,292. Here is a PSA 9 Crystal Charizard that sold for $14,500 this week. And then on to the EX era, we have this Raichu EX from Sandstorm, sold for $1,900. Here's the Gyarados EX from Fire Red Leaf Green that sold for $2,048. Here's the Suicune EX from Team Magma versus Team Aqua, sold for $8,500, folks. And then a couple of awesome reverse holo sales. Here is a reverse Milotic from EX Dragon Frontier, sold for $4,215, while this reverse holo Rayquaza sold from Holon Phantoms for $6,350. Here we have a Charizard holo from EX Power Keepers, sold for $3,211. Man, I remember it was like a year, maybe a year and a half ago. I was looking to pick this card up. It was selling for somewhere between $1,000 to $1,200, and I'm like, I'm gonna wait until it gets below $1,000. Well, look what happened. And then just a couple of cards from the Diamond and Pearl era. Here from Secret Wanderers, we saw this Charizard holo sell for $5,613, while the reverse holo copy of this card sold for $9,603. And then we saw one Level X card. It was this Raichu from Stormfront, sold as a PSA 10 for $3,650. And then lastly on eBay, we saw a couple of pieces of sealed product that were very significant. Here is a first edition Korean base set booster box, a box you hardly ever see, sold for $19,101 this week. Here's a first edition Team Rocket box that sold for $21,724. A first edition Gym Challenge box that sold for $24,928. Here is a black and white Plasma Storm booster box that sold for $19,218. Here's a black and white Dragons Exalted box that sold for $11,594. And then we saw this XY Phantom Forces box sell for $12,481 this week. A couple of cards from the alt auction block that I found interesting. Here's a first edition Light Arcanine in PSA 10 from Neo Destiny, sold for $5,490. Here is a Black Star promo Venusaur EX from the XY era, sold as a PSA 10 for $5,521. Here is a BGS 9.5 first edition Lugia from Neo Genesis, sold for $9,061. Here's a BGS 9.5 Reverse Holo Charizard from Legendary Collection that sold for $10,844. Here we saw a Japanese Gold Star Flareon 30,000 point promo card in PSA 10 that sold for $19,800. And then lastly on alt, we saw this Hamino autographed Birthday Pikachu. This is from the 25th anniversary. This is not the OG Birthday Pikachu. but it was autographed. Both the autograph and the grade were 10s, sold for $20,762. And then we're going to finish off this auction recap with some cards from Fanatics. Here is a Holo Gengar from Expedition, sold as a PSA 10 for $7,500. Here is a CGC 10 Pristine Japanese Gold Star Jolteon 20,000 point promo card that sold for $7,800, while a BGS 10 Pristine copy sold for $8,400 this week. Here's an Umbreon Holo from Call of Legends that sold as a PSA 10 for $8,400 as well. And then a Crystal Nidoking from Aquapolis that also sold for $8,400. Here we saw the Base 2 Charizard. Very, very low pop card, folks, in PSA 10 sell for $10,800. Here is a reverse holo Gyarados from Legendary Collection that sold for $12,600. And then check this out, folks, a first edition Articuno from Fossil. The lowest pop bird from first edition Fossil sold for $19,200. And then a couple of first edition base set cards came by. Here is an Alakazam in PSA 10, sold for $22,800. And then we saw two first edition base set Garys, and they both sold for $30,000 each. And then here we saw a CGC 10 Pristine first edition Lugia from Neo Genesis again. This copy here sold for $50,400. And then we're going to finish off this recap with these two Gold Star beauties right here. It is a BGS 9.5 Japanese Gold Star Espeon 20,000 point promo that sold for $66,000, while the BGS 9.5 Japanese Gold Star Umbreon 70,000 point promo card sold for $180,000, folks. Man, guys, what did you think of this week's recap? Like I said, some tremendous highs and then some cards that have been selling pretty low recently. What do you think? Please leave a comment below. I really look forward to hearing from you. And that's all I got for you today. Thank you for tuning in, and I will catch you all in my next one.